Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we are cracking open an economist whose ideas were, well, so straightforward they kind of threatened to upend a century of political maneuvering, and they really remain the bedrock of free market thought today.
That's right. We're plunging into Henry Hazlitt's 1946 masterpiece, Economics in One Lesson.
A book written just after World War II, but its core argument feels startlingly relevant, doesn't it?
Incredibly so. It's foundational for anyone interested in classical economic principles. And Hazlitt's core claim is pretty bold. He says almost every major economic policy error rests on just one single recurring fallacy.
A fallacy that politicians and special interests seem to exploit relentlessly.
Precisely. You focus on one part of the picture, the easy part, the visible part.
Okay, so our mission today is clear. We need to really define that error, trace its consequences, see how it pops up in modern debates, and hopefully equip you, the listener, with the tools to spot bad economics when it's dressed up as, political virtue.
Sounds good. Let's jump right in.
So what is this one lesson Hazlitt presents right off the bat?
Well, Hazlitt distills the entire art of economics down to this core principle, which he actually adapted from the great 19th century French economist Frédéric Bastiat. The principle is, look not merely at the immediate effects of any act or policy, but look at the longer effects and trace the consequences not just for one group, but for all groups.
It sounds so simple, doesn't it? Almost like common sense, grandmotherly wisdom. Look past the quick treat, think about the long-term cost.
It does sound simple, but Hazlitt's application of this is, it's ruthless. He applies this lens to everything. Minimum wage laws, inflation, government debt, trade barriers, you name it.
It forces you to move beyond what's easily seen, right? The obvious, maybe positive effect on one specific group that gets all the headlines.
Exactly. That's the scene. The good economist, Hazlitt argues, has to look at what's unseen, the dispersed, the indirect, maybe the negative consequences that ripple out across the whole community, often over a longer time frame.
And the classic illustration he uses to really hammer this home is the broken window parable. So the setup is, a kid throws a brick through a baker's window. It costs the baker, say, $50 to repair it. The crowd gathers.
And someone inevitably says, well, look on the bright side. This creates business for the glazier. The glazier gets $50 he wouldn't have had otherwise. He'll spend that money and it'll circulate, creating more business down the line.
Right. So the vandal, in this view, becomes a kind of public benefactor. Destruction leads to economic activity. This is the argument of the bad economist, the one who only sees the immediate transaction.
And we are absolutely going to unpack why that conclusion is fundamentally flawed. It misses the crucial unseen part of the equation.
Okay, let's dive into that core distinction then. Seen versus unseen consequences. Why is the unseen so easily forgotten or maybe deliberately ignored?
Well, if you look at economic debates today, turn on the news, listen to politicians, it often seems dominated by what Hazlitt would call the bad economist.
And it's not necessarily about intelligence, right? It's about the scope of their vision.
Exactly. The bad economist focuses only on the immediate, direct consequences for one particular group. The group that's maybe lobbying them, or the group whose votes they need.
While the good economist has the tougher job, they have to look beyond the immediate headline, beyond that one group.
Yes, they have to consider the longer, the indirect, the secondary consequences for all groups. It requires, frankly, a leap of imagination. You have to think about transactions that didn't happen, wealth that wasn't created because resources were diverted.
And Hazlitt is pretty blunt about why this failure to look ahead is so common. He doesn't think it's just accidental ignorance.
No, he argues it's systematic. It's fueled by what he calls the special pleading of selfish interests.
Meaning specific groups trying to get an advantage, even if it hurts everyone else overall.
Precisely. An industry wants a subsidy. A union wants a particular wage mandate. A region wants a specific government project. These groups will hire, as Hazlitt puts it, the best viable minds, lobbyists, PR firms, even economists, to present their case persuasively.
Framing their private gain as if it's a public good, making the immediate benefit to them seem like a benefit for all.
And they repeat it persistently. They focus laser-like on the seen benefit.
This reminds me of that often misused Keynes quote, "In the long run, we are all dead." People use it to justify focusing only on the short term.
Hazlitt tackles that head on. He completely rejects it as an escape clause for irresponsible policy. He says, and this is really central, we are already suffering the long-run consequences of the policies of the remote or recent past.
So today is the long-run consequence of yesterday's short-sightedness.
Exactly. Today is already the tomorrow, which the bad economists yesterday urged us to ignore. Think about chronic inflation today. Maybe it's the long-run result of massive government deficit spending 5 or 10 years ago. We're living in that ignored long run right now.
That really connects the dots. It explains why bad economics is so politically powerful. The proponents just need to show one simple half-truth.
The immediate positive effect on one group. It's visible, it's concrete, maybe it's emotionally appealing. Look, we saved this factory. Look, we created these construction jobs. Look, we gave out these checks.
And the correction. The full story.
Well, that's the hard part. The good economist's job, as Hazlitt admits, requires a long, complicated, and dull chain of reasoning. You have to trace the money. Where did it come from? What else could it have been used for? What are the opportunity costs? What's the impact on taxes, on capital, on prices down the line?
And audiences, especially in a fast-paced political environment, often just tune out the complicated part.
Naturally. Especially when the half-truth sounds so appealing, maybe framed as helping the little guy or protecting a vital industry. It's much easier to dismiss the complex analysis as just, old-fashioned economics or laissez-faire dogma or capitalist apologetics.
It becomes a way to rationalize intellectual laziness while pushing policies that benefit a specific constituency, like an intellectual shell game.
Played at the highest levels, often with billions, even trillions of dollars at stake.
Okay, let's apply this seen versus unseen logic directly to that broken window parable. The brick goes through the window, $50 cost. The crowd cheers for the glazier.
Right, the glazier gets $50. That is the seen consequence, clear as day.
But the good economist asks,
what is unseen? What did the baker intend to do with that $50 if the window hadn't been broken?
Hazlitt suggests he was going to buy a new suit from the tailor.
Exactly. So, because of the vandalism, the baker now must spend the $50 on the window. He can't buy the suit.
So the glazier's gain is the tailor's loss.
Precisely. The glazier gains $50, the tailor loses $50 in potential business. Net new employment, 0. The community hasn't gained any overall business activity, it's just been diverted from tailoring to glazing.
And importantly, the community is actually poorer.
Yes, it's exactly $50 poorer. It has a replacement window, sure, but it doesn't have the new suit that would have also been created. The suit represents the real wealth, the real production that was destroyed or foregone because of the vandalism. The suit is the invisible loss.
This simple story becomes Hazlitt's wrecking ball against the idea that destruction itself can ever be an economic positive.
And he immediately scales this up. He applies the same logic to the immense destruction caused by war, tackling the blessings of destruction argument head-on in Chapter 3.
This was a real argument after World War II, wasn't it? That bombed-out cities in Germany and Japan would somehow lead to faster economic recovery?
It sounds perverse, but yes. Some argued that the sheer need to rebuild all those flattened cities, destroyed factories, created this huge backed-up demand that would fuel prosperity.
It's the broken window fallacy on a terrifying scale.
Absolutely. The fundamental error is confusing need with demand. Destruction creates enormous need, obviously, but effective economic demand requires purchasing power. It requires savings, income, functioning infrastructure, capital goods.
And war destroys all of that. Not just the physical buildings, but the savings, the capital, the ability to produce efficiently.
Right. War devastates the very means by which need can be translated into effective demand in the marketplace. So where rebuilding did happen, Hazlitt argues it was largely a diversion of demand.
Meaning
societies had to rebuild houses, they had to replace essential factories, but every resource, every worker, every ton of steel, every investment dollar put into that rebuilding was a resource not available for something else. Less manpower, less capital, less purchasing power left over for all the other consumer goods or long-term investment they might have made otherwise.
So the visible activity of rebuilding hides the invisible loss of other potential production.
Exactly. And often the only reason this massive rebuilding looks like prosperity is because it's financed by inflation government printing money to pay for the war effort and reconstruction.
The money illusion.
Yes. People see rising monetary incomes, bigger numbers on their paychecks, and they feel richer. But if prices are rising just as fast or faster, their actual purchasing power, the amount of real goods and services they can buy, might actually be falling. Hazlitt points out this illusion of prosperity via rising prices could be achieved just as well through peacetime inflation. The destruction itself is always, always a net loss of real wealth.
This flows perfectly into the next application, government public spending in peacetime. This is probably the most common form of the broken window fallacy we see today.
Absolutely. Every politician loves to announce a new bridge, a new dam, a new highway project, a new high-speed rail line. The argument is always the same. It will provide employment or add wealth.
We see the construction workers, we see the finished project, it's tangible.
That's the scene. But Hazlitt forces us back to the fundamental constraint, something the American founders understood very well when they framed the Constitution with limited enumerated powers. Where does the money come from? All government spending must eventually be paid for by taxation. There's no magic money tree. Even borrowing just defers the taxes. And inflation, as Hazlitt calls it, is just a vicious form of taxation.
So let's say the government spends $1 billion on a new bridge. We see the bridge workers employed. That's the seam part.
But the good economist has to ask, what were the taxpayers going to do with that $1 billion if the government hadn't taken it?
They might have spent it on cars, clothes, food, housing, or maybe they would have saved or invested it.
Exactly. Invested in starting a new business, expanding an existing one, funding research and development, buying new equipment for a factory. For every public job created building that bridge, the seen, a private job is destroyed somewhere else, the unseen, because the taxpayers have less money to spend or invest.
So employment isn't created, it's just diverted.
Diverted. And potentially diverted from more productive uses decided by millions of individual consumers and investors to less productive uses decided by politicians based on political calculations.
The unseen loss is abstract, which makes it politically convenient to ignore. We drive on the new bridge, but we never see the private factory that wasn't built, the new medical device that wasn't invented, the small business that never opened its doors because the capital was taxed away.
Hazlitt uses the example of huge projects like the Tennessee Valley Authority, the TVA. It was hailed as this incredible feat of government planning, bringing electricity and development. That's the seen success. But where did the immense capital to build the TVA come from? It was expropriated through taxes from private citizens and businesses all across the country. Hazlitt challenges us to consider the unseen. What private power plants, what factories, what homes, what innovations would have been created if that capital had remained in private hands, allocated by market signals rather than government decree? We see the dam, but we don't see the foregone private progress.
And this leads to another layer of cost, the impact of the taxes themselves. It's not just a neutral transfer.
No, not at all. High taxes actively discourage production and capital accumulation. This is Chapter 5, Taxes Discourage Production.
How so?
Think about high income tax rates, especially at the margin, say 50%, 75%, maybe even higher historically or in some places. Hazlitt puts it starkly. If a high earner, an entrepreneur or a corporation, knows they only get to keep a small fraction of any additional profit they make,
they ask themselves, why bother?
Exactly. Why work 6, 8, or 10 months of the year for the government and only 6, 4, or 2 months for themselves and their stockholders? The incentive to take risks, to innovate, to invest long-term in potentially high reward but uncertain projects shrinks dramatically.
So less capital gets accumulated.
Less capital accumulation means fewer new businesses starting up. It means slower adoption of new productivity-enhancing machinery and technology. It means slower overall economic growth.
And the ultimate effect?
The ultimate effect, paradoxically, is often lower real wages for everyone. Real wages depend fundamentally on labor productivity, how much workers can produce per hour. And productivity depends heavily on the amount and quality of capital, the tools, the machines, the technology that workers have to work with.
So by taxing away the funds that would have become capital investment, the government actually hinders the very process that raises living standards for workers in the long run.
Precisely. The attempt to soak the rich through excessive taxation can end up starving the entire economy of the investment needed for broad-based prosperity. It harms the very workers it often claims it wants to help.
Okay, let's shift from taxes to another form of government intervention, credit manipulation. Hazlitt tackles this in Chapter 6, Credit Diverts Production. This covers things like government loans, loan guarantees, farm subsidies, maybe even corporate bailouts.
Right. And the political appeal is always, we need to provide more credit to help this group, maybe small businesses, farmers, first-time home buyers, or a struggling industry.
But Hazlitt forces us to look at the definition. What is credit, really?
Credit is debt. So proposals for increased government credit are ultimately proposals for increased debt. And crucially, when the government gets involved, it's usually risking taxpayer money.
And the key difference he draws is between how private lenders and government lenders allocate that credit, that debt.
Yes. A private lender is risking their own money or their depositors' money. They have a very strong incentive to carefully assess the risk, to lend to borrowers who are likely to succeed and repay the loan. They look for person A, someone with a good track record, a solid plan, collateral.
Whereas government lenders
are often pressured politically to lend to borrowers who can't get private loans. Person B may be someone with a poor credit history, a shaky business plan, insufficient collateral. These are often risks deemed too great for private industry.
which usually means private lenders think the venture is likely to fail.
Exactly. But here's the crucial point. The total amount of real capital available in the economy, the actual tractors, factories, raw materials, skilled labor, is finite at any given moment.
So if the government gives a loan to person B to buy a tractor,
That means person A, the more efficient, creditworthy farmer who would have gotten a private loan for that same tractor, now doesn't get it. The tracker, the real resource, is diverted from the more productive user to the less productive user.
the government intervention allocates capital based on political goals, not economic efficiency.
Correct. And the result? Farmer B, being less efficient or having a worse plan, might only produce 100 bushels of corn with that tractor. Farmer A might have produced 150 bushels. The net effect of the government helping Farmer B is that total production for the community is reduced by 50 bushels.
We see Farmer B getting the loan, the seen benefit. We don't see Farmer A's lost potential output, the unseen cost.
Precisely. Government credit programs, by assuming risks the market rejects, often misallocate scarce capital, leading to waste and lower overall production. It might feel good politically, but it's economically inefficient.
Okay, let's tackle another big one. The fear of machines. Chapter 7, The Curse of Machinery. This feels like a constantly recurring anxiety, doesn't it? The idea that automation kills jobs.
It's perhaps the most persistent economic fallacy there is. Hazlitt calls it the Luddite fallacy, after the 19th century English workers who smashed textile machinery. It just keeps coming back 1,000 times, he says, out of its own ashes.
You hear echoes of it today in debates about AI, robotics, automation. People worry about mass unemployment.
And that fear is understandable on an individual level. But Hazlitt uses history to show the bigger picture. He cites the example of Richard Arkwright's cotton spinning machinery introduced around 1760. There were riots, fierce opposition. People were terrified of losing their livelihoods.
Oh, what actually happened?
The results were astonishing. Just 27 years later, by 1787, employment in the English cotton textile industry hadn't vanished. It had exploded from about 7,900 people to 320,000. That's an increase of over 4,000%.
Wow. So how does that work? How does introducing labor-saving machinery lead to more jobs overall? Let's break down the seen versus unseen here.
Okay. The seen effect is obvious and immediate. A factory owner installs a new machine, and maybe they lay off half their workforce for that specific task. That's the visible job loss that causes fear.
But the unseen effects start kicking in.
Right. First, someone had to build that machine. That created jobs in the machine tool industry, an unseen offset.
Okay. What else?
Second, the factory owner now has cost savings because of the machine's efficiency. They have extra profit. Hazlitt says they can only use these savings in basically 3 ways, and all of them tend to increase employment eventually.
What are the 3 ways?
1, they might use the profits to expand their own operations, buy more machines, hire more workers in other departments, sales, marketing, distribution. 2, they might invest the profits in other industries, buying stocks, bonds, or starting a new venture elsewhere, funding jobs there. 3, they might simply increase their own personal spending, buy a bigger house, a new car, fancier clothes, creating jobs in those consumer industries.
So the savings don't just vanish, they get redeployed.
Exactly. But the biggest, most widespread, and often most overlooked gain comes from competition.
How so?
Competition eventually forces the manufacturer to pass on those cost savings to consumers in the form of lower prices. So maybe that coat that used to cost $50 now only costs $30 because of more efficient production methods.
And the consumer?
The consumer buys the coat for $30. Now they have $20 left over that they wouldn't have had before. What do they do with that $20?
You spend it on something else.
Right, they buy a book, go out to dinner, get their car washed, save it towards a vacation. That $20 multiplied across millions of consumers creates demand and employment in countless other industries. This is the most powerful unseen benefit.
So the real purpose of machines isn't even primarily to create jobs in the first place.
Correct. Hazlitt stresses this. The primary function of machinery is to increase production, make goods more abundant and cheaper, and therefore raise the standard of living for everyone. More goods, lower prices, higher real wages, that's the goal. Job creation is often a beneficial side effect of that process.
We do have to acknowledge the Joe Smith tragedy, though, right? The individual skilled worker whose specific job becomes obsolete overnight because of a new machine. Their personal hardship is real.
Absolutely. That short-run, localized disruption is painful and shouldn't be minimized. Society might need ways to help individuals transition. But Hazlitt argues the solution can't be to halt progress itself to engage in Lettism or enforce make-work rules. That would condemn everyone to lower living standards just to protect a few existing jobs temporarily. The focus has to be on the enormous long-run gains for society as a whole.
Let's apply this seen-unseen framework to international trade now, specifically tariffs, taxes on imported goods. Chapter 11, protectionism does not protect.
Another classic case of special pleading. The argument for tariffs is always about saving a specific domestic industry and its workers from foreign competition.
So let's say we put a $5 tariff on imported sweaters to protect the American sweater industry and its, say, 1,000 workers. That's the seen benefit. Those 1,000 jobs are protected. The local factory stays open. Politician can point to it.
Very visible. But what's the unseen cost?
The consumer pays.
Every single consumer who buys a sweater now pays $5 more. And that's true whether they buy the imported one, which now costs $5 extra, or a domestically produced one, because the domestic producers can now raise their prices right up to the level of the imported plus tariff price without fear of being undercut.
So that $5 is taken out of the pocket of every sweater buyer.
Right. That's $5 they cannot spend on something else: groceries, movie tickets, gasoline, books. That reduction in spending, multiplied across millions of consumers, means fewer sales and fewer jobs in countless other domestic industries.
Those job losses are scattered, maybe tiny in any one place, so they're invisible. A slightly smaller crowd at the local restaurant, one less hire at the bookstore, slightly less cargo handled at the ports.
Exactly. Invisible, but real. The net result, Hazlitt argues, is that tariffs shift resources away from efficient domestic industries, especially those that could export, and towards less efficient, higher-cost domestic industries that need protection. They reduce overall American productivity and efficiency.
And in the long run?
In the long run, tariffs reduce real wages because they make the country poorer overall. We get less total output for our efforts. It's another example of trying to create wealth through artificial scarcity, benefiting one group at the expense of everyone else.
This connects directly to Chapter 12, the drive for exports, where Hazlitt critiques the almost pathological yearning for exports combined with a deep suspicion of imports.
Yes, the mercantilist fallacy that a nation gets rich by selling as much as possible abroad and buying as little as possible in return.
But Hazlitt points out the obvious link.
Exports pay for imports, and imports pay for exports. They are two sides of the same coin. If foreigners can't sell their goods to us because of tariffs or other barriers, they don't earn the dollars they need to buy our goods. Cutting imports inevitably leads to cutting exports.
What about government efforts to boost exports directly, like foreign aid loans tied to buying our products, or direct export subsidies?
Hazlitt sees these as fundamentally foolish, more examples of ignoring the unseen costs. If the government lends money to country X on condition they buy American tractors, and country X defaults on the loan.
We just gave the tractors away.
Exactly. Paid for by the American taxpayer. A nation doesn't get rich by giving its products away for free.
And subsidies. Paying our own companies to sell goods abroad for less than they cost to produce.
Same basic problem. It looks good for that specific exporting company, the seen benefit, but the American taxpayer makes up the difference. We're essentially taxing ourselves to give foreigners discounts on our products. It's another attempt to get rich by giving things away, which Hazlitt finds absurd.
Okay, we've seen how Hazlitt critiques interventions that distort production and trade. Now let's turn to direct manipulation of prices and wages. He starts with attempts to push prices up, specifically parity prices for agriculture in Chapter 13.
This was a big idea, especially during the New Deal. The goal was to raise farm prices to achieve parity, a supposedly fair ratio, with the prices of industrial goods farmers bought. The argument was that boosting farmer income would help the whole economy.
More purchasing power for farmers means they buy more from factories, right? That's the seen effect.
That's the seen effect. But let's trace the money. using Hazlitt's method. Suppose the government artificially forces the price of wheat up from $1 to $1.50 a bushel. The farmer gains 50 cents.
But who pays that extra 50 cents?
The city worker, the consumer, pays 50 cents more for bread, pasta, anything made with wheat. So that city worker now has exactly 50 cents less to spend on manufactured goods from factories.
So the factories gain 50 cents in sales to the farmer, but they lose 50 cents in sales to the city worker.
Precisely. The net gain for industry is zero. It's just a transfer of purchasing power from urban consumers to rural producers.
But is that the end of the story? Is it just a wash?
No, because to maintain those artificially high prices, the government usually has to intervene to reduce supply. They have to tell farmers not to produce so much, maybe pay them to leave land fallow, or even destroy crops, like the infamous examples of the Agricultural Adjustment Act.
So we're deliberately creating scarcity.
Yes, this is a direct destruction of wealth. Less food is produced and consumed. The nation as a whole is poorer. And often, these programs keep inefficient, high-cost farmers in business, preventing resources, land, labor, from moving to more productive uses. It reduces overall efficiency.
Okay, so that's artificially high prices. What about the opposite? Price ceilings. Fixing prices below the marking level, like rent control or price caps on gasoline or food during emergencies. Chapter 17.
This seems appealing, right? Keep necessities affordable for consumers. That's the seen intention.
But the immediate economic effect.
It's twofold and paradoxical. One, demand increases because the item is artificially cheap. Everyone wants more of it. Two, supply decreases because producers can't make a profit at the controlled price, or their profit margins shrink drastically. Marginal producers are forced out of business.
Increased demand plus decreased supply equals
Shortages, empty shelves, gas lines, waiting lists. The very good the government tried to make affordable becomes unavailable.
And then the government has to react to the shortage it created.
It gets drawn into an ever-widening circle of control. To keep bread prices low, maybe they have to control the price of flour. Then they have to control the price of wheat. Then the price of fertilizer and farm labor. Then the price of tractors. It snowballs.
What about subsidies? Couldn't the government just pay producers the difference to keep them supplying the good at the low controlled price?
They often try that. But Hazlitt points out that while the subsidy check goes to the producer, it's really a subsidy for the consumer. It allows the consumer to buy the good for less than its real cost of production.
And who pays for the subsidy?
The taxpayer, of course. Either through direct taxes now or indirect taxes later via inflation or debt. The cost is still there, just hidden.
So what's the fundamental flaw Hazlitt sees in price controls?
He argues it comes from thinking of people only as consumers. Everyone loves low prices for the things they buy, but they forget that they're also producers, workers, farmers, business owners who want high prices or wages for the things they sell. You can't consistently have it both ways through government mandates.
This leads directly to minimum wage laws, Chapter 18. Hazlitt treats this as just another form of price fixing, setting the price of labor above the market rate.
Exactly. The goal seems noble. Ensure workers earn a living wage, give them more purchasing power, stimulate the economy. That's the seen intention and the political argument.
But the unseen consequence, according to Hazlitt?
His logic is stark. If a worker's productivity is not high enough to be worth the legally mandated minimum wage to an employer, that worker simply does not get hired. Or if they already have a job, they might lose it.
So the minimum wage, if it's effective at all, meaning set above the market clearing level for some workers, doesn't raise all low wages. It substitutes unemployment for a low wage for the least skilled, least experienced worker.
Precisely. It can harm the very people it's intended to help, young people looking for their first job, low-skilled workers needing entry-level experience, by pricing them out of the labor market altogether. They are denied the chance to earn something and gain skills.
So what is the way to raise wages, according to Hazlitt?
Not government decrees. The only sustainable way to raise real wages across the board is to increase labor productivity.
Which means?
More and better capital investment. Tools, machines, technology, new inventions and innovations, better management techniques, improved worker education and training. Things that allow workers to produce more value per hour. Real wages ultimately come out of real production, not out of laws.
Okay, the final big topic in this section, inflation, Chapter 22. Hazlitt calls it a particularly vicious form of taxation. Why?
It's vicious, partly because it's deceptive. It plays on the age-old, deeply ingrained error of confusing money with wealth.
Thinking that if we just have more dollars, we're richer.
Right. Real wealth is goods and services, food, houses, cars, healthcare, factories. Printing more paper money or creating digital currency units doesn't magically create more stuff. It just means each dollar buys less stuff than before. Prices rise.
But the real danger, the reason it's politically tempting and economically destructive, is that inflation doesn't affect everyone equally or at the same time.
This is the critical point, what economists sometimes call the Cantillon effect. The inflation doesn't spread evenly like adding water to soup. It injects itself at specific points.
Meaning the first people to get the new money benefit.
Exactly. Group A, maybe government contractors who get paid with newly created money, or banks that receive reserves first, or initial recipients of stimulus checks. They get to spend this new money before prices have fully adjusted upwards across the economy. They get a temporary windfall. They can buy goods and services at the old, lower prices.
But as that new money circulates,
it bids up prices. So the later groups, let's call them Group D, people on fixed incomes like retirees, workers whose wages lag behind, people holding cash savings, they suffer the most. They find themselves paying higher prices for almost everything before their own incomes have caught up, if they ever do.
their real standard of living falls. It's a hidden transfer of wealth from the later recipients to the earlier recipient.
And that's why it's a tax, a hidden, unlegislated, and often regressive tax. It arbitrarily redistributes wealth. And Hazlitt calls it the opium of the people because it can create a temporary illusion of prosperity while masking the true costs of government spending or debt. It allows politicians to finance programs without raising taxes directly until the inevitable economic hangover, the crisis or collapse arrives. It fundamentally undermines honest calculation and sound economic planning.
So we've seen Hazlitt dismantle policies that try to control prices, wages, production, trade. Now let's look at something often attacked directly: profits. Chapter 21, the function of profits. There's a lot of hostility towards profit, isn't there?
Immense hostility. It's often portrayed as unfair, greedy, something extracted from workers or consumers. Hazlitt pushes back hard against this. First, he points out that aggregate profits are often surprisingly small relative to the whole economy. He cites figures for his time showing corporate net income averaging less than 5% of national income.
And many businesses fail, right? Profit isn't guaranteed.
Not at all. Risk is inherent. He notes how many new businesses, like grocery stores back then, failed within a couple of years. Losses are just as real as profits.
But when an industry does experience high profits, what function does that serve? That's the seen part, big profits for Company X.
That high profit acts as a crucial market signal. It tells entrepreneurs and investors, hey, consumers really want more of this product or service and current supply isn't enough. There's an opportunity here.
So the profit attracts new investment, the unseen response.
Exactly. High profits, the seen, attract new capital and competitors into that industry, the unseen. New companies start up, existing ones expand. They build more factories, hire more workers, innovate to try and capture some of those profits.
And what happens as supply increases due to this new investment?
As production expands to meet consumer demand, competition drives prices down, and those initially high profits get competed back down towards the average level across the economy. The signal has done its job. Resources were reallocated to where consumers wanted them most.
So if the government steps in to cap prices or limit profits in that hot industry,
it destroys the signal. It removes the incentive for new investment and expansion. Production remains stuck below what consumers actually want, leading to persistent shortages or lower quality. Trying to eliminate profit short-circuits the very mechanism that directs resources efficiently.
Okay, closely related to the defense of profit is the defense of saving. Chapter 23, the assault on saving. Hazlitt was writing when Keynesian ideas were gaining ground, ideas that sometimes portrayed saving as harmful.
Yes, the idea was that saving meant less consumption, which meant less demand, which could lead to economic slowdowns or recessions. Spending was seen as virtuous. Saving is almost wicked because it supposedly withdrew money from the economy.
How does Hazlitt counter this? He uses a great little analogy, doesn't he?
He does the story of two brothers, Alvin and Benjamin. Both earn a good income, say $50,000 a year back then. Alvin is the spendthrift. He spends every penny on immediate consumption, fancy clothes, nights out, luxury goods.
And he's seen as a public benefactor, right? Because his spending creates visible jobs for retailers, restaurants.
That's the seen effect. Benjamin, on the other hand, is the saver. He lives more modestly, spending maybe $25,000 on his immediate needs, and he saves and invests the other $25,000.
To the naive observer, it looks like Benjamin is creating less employment than Alvin.
But Hazlitt reveals the unseen. Benjamin's saving isn't money stuffed under a mattress. Saving is only another form of spending. When Benjamin puts his $25,000 in a bank or buys stocks or bonds, that money doesn't disappear. It gets loaned out or invested. It's turned over to someone else to spend on capital goods.
Like what?
Like building a new factory, buying new machinery, funding research for a new product, constructing an apartment building. This investment spending creates just as much employment, often higher skilled, higher paid employment in construction, manufacturing, engineering, as Alvin's consumption spending.
And the long-term difference.
In the long run, Alvin, the spendthrift, ends up broke. Benjamin, the saver and investor, sees his capital grow. His investments generate new income and wealth, supporting more and better jobs over time, contributing to the overall productive capacity of the economy. Saving doesn't shrink the economy, it shifts resources from producing immediate consumption goods to producing capital goods, which is the essential driver of long-term economic growth and higher living standards.
So the fear of oversaving is misplaced.
Largely, yes. It shifts spending, it doesn't destroy it. And Hazlitt argues there's always more need for capital. Better tools, better infrastructure, new technologies to improve productivity and living standards.
Okay, so Hazlitt brings all these threads together in his final chapter, The Lesson Restated. He really emphasizes that economics is about seeing the whole picture.
Yes, it's the science of recognizing inevitable implications, of looking at both sides of the coin. He gives sharp examples.
Increase credit.
Equals increased debt.
Increase exports.
Means you must eventually increase import.
Increase government subsidies.
Inevitably means increased taxes, whether now or later, visibly or hidden through inflation. These aren't opinions, they're economic identities.
And he brings back that idea of the person who always pays the price for these well-intentioned interventions that focus only on the seen benefit for one group.
Right. He invokes William Graham Sumner's concept of the forgotten man, let's call him C. You have the reformer, A, and the politician or do-gooder, B, who decide they want to help some victim or group X.
But the cost of helping X
always falls on C, the forgotten man. C is the ordinary taxpayer, the productive worker, the consumer who quietly pays higher prices or higher taxes, or sees their own opportunities diminish to fund the generosity of A and B towards X. C is the one who is never thought of in the initial calculus.
And underpinning almost all these fallacies, Hazlitt argues, is a fundamentally flawed philosophy.
He calls it the insane doctrine of wealth through scarcity. So many bad policies, tariffs, make-work schemes, price supports requiring production cuts, resisting new technology, are based on the idea that if you make something scarcer, you somehow make the community richer.
Which might seem true for the one group producing that specific scarce thing.
Yes, scarcity might be privately beneficial for one protected group if they can keep everything they buy abundant and cheap. But it's always publicly false. A nation cannot get richer by producing less. The goal must always be abundance.
So the ultimate lesson is to see the problem whole, not in fragments. To consider everyone as consumer and as producer. You know, this relentless focus on consequences, on unseen costs, on the limits of government action. It really resonates with the principles of the American founders, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. Sound economics, in Hazlitt's view, is inseparable from sound political philosophy, from wisdom about government's proper role. The founders understood that liberty and prosperity weren't gifts from the state. They arose from voluntary exchange, private property, and limited government.
That's why the Constitution originally enumerated specific limited powers for Congress, restricted taxation to uniform, public purposes, and aimed for sound money, forbidding states from issuing inflationary paper currency.
Both Hazlitt and the founders, in a sense, were battling the same core fallacy. The belief that wealth and prosperity can be commanded into existence by political authority rather than emerging organically from individual effort, innovation, saving, and free exchange within a framework of law.
So Hazlitt's one lesson, look at the long-run consequences for everyone, is kind of the economic counterpart to the founders' political wisdom about restraining power and ensuring accountability.
I think that's a fair way to put it. When government tries to hide the costs of its actions through complex regulations, hidden taxes, deficit spending, or especially inflation, it's not just making an economic error, it's committing a kind of moral error. It's undermining transparency and responsibility.
Which brings us back to the core takeaway. Sound economics and sound government really go hand in hand. Hazlitt's book isn't just about spreadsheets and graphs, it's about responsibility, about seeing clearly.
It really is. Freedom and prosperity, he suggests, can only endure when citizens refuse to be fooled by the immediate, visible promise and instead demand accountability for the long-term, unseen consequences.
So the real cost of every policy is what we don't see. The jobs that weren't created, the innovations that didn't happen, the wealth that wasn't produced, the small erosions of freedom.
Economics in one lesson truly is liberty in one lesson. Nothing is free, except perhaps through freedom itself, the freedom to produce, exchange, and bear the consequences of our own choices.
So a final thought for you, the listener. Next time you hear about a government program or policy promising some immediate, tangible benefit for Group X,
Pause and ask yourself Hazlitt's questions. Who is the forgotten man? See who will ultimately pay for this. And what unseen opportunities, what potential wealth will be destroyed or prevented from ever coming into existence because of this intervention? That's the kind of critical thinking Hazlitt demands.
Well, that's about all the time we have. You've been listening to The Deep Dive from Wake Up and Smell the Freedom, where ideas percolate. Thanks for joining us as we continue to explore the ideas that shape liberty and continue to shape us today. Remember, the pursuit of liberty begins with understanding, and understanding begins with asking the right questions. Until next time.
Bye-bye.